Hawkins Horrors, a collection of terrifying tales from Netflix's Stranger Things, by Matthew J. Gilbert. Chapter 2, A Little Voice. What do you think of when you hear the words Penhurst Asylum? A home for the criminally insane? A dark prison for someone like Jimmy Ray Cutts? After Cutts killed 7 innocent people, he told the police he had no memory of committing the crimes. He swore that someone else, something else, had been pulling his strings that night. Like everyone else nearby, Christina had heard the stories and mostly ignored them. She didn't believe in ghosts and demons, but she did believe in monsters, just not the kind you see in rubber masks in the movies. The monsters she saw were simply broken human beings in need of serious mental care. They could look as normal as your neighbors, your coworkers, even your boss. Christina was surrounded by so-called maniacs 6 days a week. It was her job. She was a nurse in training. Sometimes, when she rode the bus to work, she'd hear kids scaring each other about the asylum up the road, where she spent most of her time. They'd whisper, "Monsters live in Penhurst." Well, she knew people like Ricky Dobbs also lived there. Ricky was just a 19-year-old kid, boyishly handsome, with his winning smile and athletic frame. He looked like one of those quarterbacks who were always surrounded by reporters on TV. His laugh was contagious, and like a child, he found the simplest things funny, like someone dropping their clipboard or the way certain words like lickety-split sounded when they were slowly pronounced out loud. Lickety-split, he'd say repeatedly, stretching the word out more each time. Lickety-split. Fits of laughter followed. Ricky wasn't a monster. He kept his hands to himself and never tried to grab Christina's hair. And he didn't have to be as heavily medicated as some of the more extreme cases on his block, which meant he could speak, unlike the zombies. That was what Christina called the tranquilized group, the ones who needed a sedative just to function day to day in the asylum. Ricky was no zombie, and he didn't seem crazy. He was just immature and shy, and Christina would know. She'd been looking in on him for 6 months straight now, 6 nights a week like clockwork on the graveyard shift. Christina was 22 years old. Penhurst was her first job after college, and she was determined to do her best. Her responsibilities include patrolling the hallways at night. She had to look in on each patient on her list and make sure they were okay. She'd check each patient off, wait 2 hours, and do it again. Rinse, repeat. Clean the nurse's office, restock meds, take her nightly stroll. Observe, check, report, check. Watch the clock, dream of sleeping in on Sunday morning. Sneak a candy bar. Walk, check. No one hurt, check. No danger, check. This was Christina's life, until she finished her probationary period and became a full-fledged Penhurst nurse. Then she'd get a raise, a locker, and the coveted right to choose her own shift hours. One morning, as the first rays of sun sliced through the clouds, the senior staff started appearing in the hallways in a sea of white coats. It was time for them to take the reins from the night crew. "All patients are healthy and accounted for," Christina told the head nurse. Then she packed up her things and headed for the exit, but not before stopping to look in on Ricky Dobbs one more time. She peeked through the bars of his door, but saw only an empty bed. Her eyes searched the room, but there was no sign of Ricky. She was about to call for one of the senior nurses when she heard a whimpering voice. Okay, I promise. I'll do it." It was Ricky's voice. Christina unlocked his room and slowly opened the door. "Shh," she heard Ricky say as he jumped up startled. He was tall and muscular, but acted like a little boy who'd been caught doing something he shouldn't have been doing. Christina saw that he had been in the corner against the wall, a perfect spot for hiding from the staff's 2-inch by 2-inch view of his room. "You're up early," Christina said in a friendly manner. I don't have a watch, Ricky smiled. I don't really know what time it is. Were you talking to someone just now? What's the problem here? A white coat asked, storming in. It was a doctor, one of the stuffy ones. Christina always forgot his name. Fortunately, he was wearing a name tag. Spears. And why are you not in restraints? Dr. Spears observed, shoving his way past Christina. He called for support, and 2 beefy orderlies filed in, instantly grabbing Ricky's arms, forcing them to his sides. Ricky protested a bit as they moved him back toward the bed, which was bolted to the wall. Ow! You're hurting me! Ricky cried. No, wait. There's no problem at all, Dr. Spears, Christina said. I was just... Why was this patient not restrained? Dr. Spears interrupted accusingly. He motioned for Christina to follow him out into the hall. Crestfallen, she looked at Ricky, trying to fight back from the orderly's grip. This was all her fault. If only she'd kept going, he wouldn't be straining underneath the weight of a pair of 300-pound men. She'd merely wanted to make sure he was okay. Dobbs hasn't been in restraints since I started here, she protested. He's a trusted patient who never causes any trouble. Please. So there were no special instructions given to you last night? No, sir. Then someone else is in trouble. Because I left explicit instructions for senior staff to let night crew know that starting now, all patients are to be restrained at night, no matter their threat. May I ask why? Has something happened? Jimmy Ray Cuts. Christina felt a chill down her back. It's been 5 years since his infamous killing spree, Dr. Spears continued. It's an unholy anniversary, an invitation to madness. There's chaos in the air, and that chaos will be like the scent of blood to the ravenous pack of filth under this roof. They'll want to impress him. They'll try to get his attention, to commemorate his evil deeds. I won't allow it. Cuts is being kept under 24-hour surveillance in protected custody for the next few weeks. I will have Hawkins police here to keep the peace. I advise you to stay vigilant. These people are not your friends. They are your patients. And for their safety and yours, I expect you to restrain every one of them from now on. In an even graver tone, he added, Things are about to get very interesting around here. The next night, Christina went to work a little earlier than usual. She'd been worried about Ricky all day, unable to sleep, especially after Spears' bizarre speech, which made it sound like Penhurst was about to turn into some sort of war zone. She half expected to be frisked by an officer of Hawkins PD when she went through the double doors. But all was quiet. The guard who normally checked her in wasn't at his desk. No signs of orderlies or other staff in the main hallway. Was there a staff meeting she'd forgotten to report to? Maybe it's someone's birthday, she thought. They're probably all hiding back in the staff room, stuffing themselves with cake and punch. She could have followed up on this. She liked cake as much as the next person. It would be easy to pick up the duty phone to confirm that this imagined birthday party was real. But all that went through her mind at that moment was, be quiet. This was her chance to check on Ricky before the hustle and bustle of lights out began. She didn't even stop to hang up her jacket. She went directly to Ricky Dobbs' cell. Her shoes squeaked on the freshly buffed linoleum floor, the sounds hitting faster and faster as her steps became brisker and shorter. She passed a cell, and then another. Ricky's door was in sight, and from here she could see it was open. Ah! An orderly screamed, running from the room frantic. His footsteps boomed along the floor. His white uniform was splattered with blood, and his hand covered his face. He took a few steps, then fell to the floor with a smack. A nurse soon appeared in the hallway and ran to his side. Shocked, Christina was barely able to croak, "What's going on?" The other nurse was too busy to answer. Christina stepped forward to get a good look into Ricky's room. It looked like a crime scene. For a moment, time stood still. Christina couldn't hear the people yelling. She could only hear the thunderous pounding of her own heart. A man was lying on the floor, surrounded by doctors and nurses. From this angle, Christina could tell he was badly hurt, but she couldn't tell exactly how. Judging by the puddle of blood, he was certainly fighting for his life. Some of that terrible red was also splattered on the wall, like a stomach-churning art project. No one seemed to notice her. Everyone was caught up in the moment, trying to help the man, trying to save him, trying not to show fear in the face of certain death. Her heartbeat normalized. She noticed the shoes of the injured man, pristine shoes, as white as bone. He was an orderly. She was not looking at Ricky's blood. The injured orderly was there, lying on his back. His chest had been crushed by Ricky's bed frame. An ambulance was not going to make a difference. "Hi," she heard Ricky say to her as the sound of the real world came rushing in. He said it calmly, like they had run into each other in Hawkins on a Saturday afternoon. A police officer was holding him against the wall. Ricky Dobbs had killed someone. Christina was sure there'd been some mistake. Ricky couldn't have done this. She wanted to shout it from the rooftops to anyone who'd listen, but Spears and the other senior staffers kept her and the other skeleton crew sequestered in the supply room while they hammered out the details with the police. Christina ignored the chatter of the staff and tried to listen to Spears' statement. The parts she heard at first were all things she already knew. "Ricky Dobbs was admitted for schizophrenia," Spears began. "Something about him, hearing voices, from a very young age." And then he mumbled the next few words. "He has no immediate family and no local next of kin." Spears continued. He wanted Ricky to remain under his care and direct supervision. Ricky had been showing great progress on an experimental drug, but was now, what was that last part? Complaining of hearing voices again. Correction. Voice. Singular. That was when Christina remembered her last interaction with him on the previous shift. It sounded like he'd been talking to someone. Was this something she should tell the cops? Her heart softened when she recalled how he said hi like he always did, like there wasn't a horrific scene unfolding all around him. The official story just doesn't make sense, Christina thought. They were making it seem like Ricky had been plotting to crush the orderly, like he had knowingly loosened his bed frame over a few weeks and somehow set it just right so the mishap wouldn't appear suspicious. Then he allegedly asked the orderly, "Would you look under my bed? I think I dropped my pill." And when the orderly peeked under, Ricky supposedly pulled the frame off its hinges and slammed it down on him. Repeatedly. Ricky couldn't have done that, Christina thought. He doesn't even swat at the flies in the cafeteria. The other staffers started murmuring so much that Christina couldn't focus on eavesdropping. She could only hear the voices around her in the room. "I heard a sound, so I came running, and that's when I saw him," a janitor said. Same old story. "He had it out for that orderly," an elderly orderly piped up. "Mick was his name. That patient wanted to get back at him for getting rough." "I heard him saying someone told him to do it. But you know what I think? I think it was a crazy voice in his head told him," a security guard added. "We all have that little voice, don't we?" Christina wanted to say. That little voice that tells us to walk left when we should be walking right, to choose the shortcut over the road we know, or to push that button that clearly says, "Do not push." We've all heard our inner voice try to talk us out of a bad decision, a thought that spoke to you as clearly as a friend would on the phone. At that moment, Christina's little voice was speaking up. She wanted to say all this to her coworkers, but she didn't. Her little voice, conscience, common sense, curse, whatever you wanted to call it, told her not to. Christina simply sat in silence, waiting for her turn to see Ricky and to get to the bottom of it all. Later that shift, an emergency meeting was called, led by Spears, of course. He told the staffers that Hawkins police were allowing Ricky to remain in Penhurst while they began their investigation into the homicide of Michael Mick Hogan, the young orderly who died 5 minutes after Christina had seen him under Ricky's bed. She could have been imagining it, but Spears seemed almost pleased that this macabre chain of events had unfolded, almost like it validated his doom and gloom speechifying from yesterday. If anything, it gave Spears an excuse to keep all the patients tranquilized in a drug-induced state, all in the name of keeping the peace, of course. She'd never get an answer out of Ricky now, not after a few cc's of sleep juice. During her rounds that night, Christina passed by Ricky's room, which was now sealed off with yellow crime scene tape. An aloof cop posted outside the door made sure no looky-loos snuck in to disturb the gory scene inside. She politely nodded and asked the officer where Ricky had been located. "Room at the end of the hall," the cop answered. As Christina made her way there, she could hear Ricky's voice. He was awake. She stepped a little lighter, a bit faster. She could hear him speaking in a low, raspy voice, but she couldn't quite make out the words. She stopped outside the lookout bars of his new door, just in time to hear a gravelly voice say, "Tomorrow, we'll get him." Only, it didn't sound like Ricky. "Hey, new girl," someone said. Christina turned to see Sophia, a kind older nurse, coming around the corner with a syringe in her hand. "Hey, Sophia. Crazy night, huh?" Christina said. "Nah," Sophia said nonchalantly. "When you get to be here as long as I have, you see it all. You'll see, child. Murder isn't even a drop in the bucket. I've seen riots, escapes." Escapes? Christina could barely hide her surprise. Or was it excitement? Surrounded by all these white and gray bars, escape seemed like such a romantic notion, like something out of a movie. "Oh, yeah," Sophie informed her. "Right before you started, we had a guy pull a Houdini in the middle of day shift. Didn't even take his shoes with him. Spears blew a gasket that day." How have I not heard about this? It's not the kind of thing we like to be reminded about. Not our finest hour. Look, hun, I could sit here and tell you war stories all night, Sophia said, nursing her ankle and leaning against the wall. "But my dogs are barking from all the back and forth. I gotta sit down. Would you mind administering Ricky's knockout juice for me? My ankles are killing me." Sophia offered her the needle. "Of course. Go sit down," Christina replied, doing her best to hide her excitement. "Thanks, hun. Just take one of them guys with you. Can't be too careful," Sophia said, smiling at one of the muscle-bound orderlies nearby. And with a nod of gratitude, Sophia unlocked the door to Ricky's room and let Christina in. The orderly followed, standing guard in the doorway. "Hi," Ricky said, his voice trailing off. He was clearly a bit shaken up by the sight of another orderly. "It's okay, Ricky," said Christina, offering him a smile. "I'm here to give you something to help you go to sleep." Ricky pulled the blankets over his head, embarrassed. "I didn't mean it, you know. To hurt him? It wasn't supposed to hurt him so bad," he said, his voice quivering through the covers. "I know, Ricky," Christina said. "Let me help you calm down. I just need your arm." Ricky's arm appeared from under the blanket. She could hear him sniffling while she held his hand and searched for a vein. Out of the corner of her eye, she saw the orderly suddenly peel off from the doorway to talk with another nurse. She was finally alone with Ricky. "Now or never," Christina's little voice said. "Ask him. Something. Anything." "Ricky, just now when I was coming in, I heard you talking, even though no one else is in here. And I noticed the same thing earlier this morning. Remember that? When you saw me and Dr. Spears come in with the guys?" "Yeah, I guess." "Who were you talking to?" "No one." Christina prepped the tranquilizer shot, pushing the air out of the plunger until a little spray of solution came squirting out of the eye of the needle. Christina tried again. Or you may be talking to yourself, because I do that sometimes too. We all do. It's normal. Silence. She stuck him with the needle. He didn't make a peep. Okay, just lie down and you'll feel a little tired and then... Buck, Ricky blurted out through the blanket. He told me to call him Buck. Is that what you call the little voice in your head? You gave it a name? He's not in my head. Not anymore. He's here with us. Christina felt her pulse quicken. Something about the conviction in his voice, the faceless mass under the covers looking back at her. It was creepy. This was not how she'd envisioned this going at all. Ricky went on. He's a lot closer than you think. She tightened up, feeling like the room was suddenly closing in on her. He sounds different now. As clear as you and I do, Ricky said through the blanket. He tells me to do things. Bad things. I've never heard him like this. Paralyzed with fear, Christina listened to Ricky's story as the rest of the world seemed to go quiet all around her. He is mad, and you don't want him mad. His voice slowed. The drugs were clearly taking hold now. Or he'll come for you. Lickety-split. The mass under the cover suddenly fell back onto the bed, the mattress springs making him bounce a bit. Ricky was fast asleep, and all Christina could do was sit there and stare until the orderly returned. The next few shifts were uneventful. Quiet, even. The patients slept through most of the day and night, and the Hawkins police officers were rarely away from Jimmy Ray Cutt's cell in Penhurst's East Wing. The main hall, Christina's beat, if you could call it that, felt like a ghost town. This was her chance to do a little digging. Whenever Sophia and the other senior nurses would step out for their hourly smoke break, Christina would sneak into the office and secretly thumb through the patient records. It began as a search for info on Ricky's past, but the paperwork was long gone, most likely on the desk of some Hawkins deputy next to a half-eaten donut. But one night, something else caught her eye, and her imagination. A red folder labeled, "For executive staff only. Sensitive materials." Normally, she would have shut the file cabinet and walked away, but a little voice in her head egged her on. There could be info in there about Ricky, or significant dirt on Spears. Hey, a girl could dream. She had to know what sinister secrets were inside the crimson folder. She grabbed it and quickly thumbed through the pages. It was a report on the escape of one Harland Buck, the same infamous escape Sophia had mentioned. It read like the pages of a horror story. An empty bed, 2 empty shoes, an invisible man. He vanished into thin air. It helped explain why Spears was so uptight. He'd lost a dangerous patient and could not have another major malfunction, especially with Jimmy Ray Cutts on the premises. She returned the file and got back to her official duties. This was the night she noticed Ricky was very interested in the walls of his cell. A few nights later, a storm hit Hawkins. It knocked down trees and made a mess of roadways. So much so that a lot of the senior Penhurst staff were forced to stay on the grounds and wait out Mother Nature for their chance to return to their homes. This meant the night shift and the senior day shift would spill over and walk the halls at the same time. Christina dreaded spending 1 minute extra with Spears. For a so-called sane man, he troubled her more than the crazy patients ever could. As thunder clapped in the distance, Christina clocked her route to the medroom, where Sophia, the only friendly nurse for 10 miles, waited. "Hey, I'm here for Ricky's knockout juice," she said with a smile. "Not tonight, hon," Sophia frowned. "Dr. Spears is stranded here because of the rain, and he wants to administer all of tonight's doses himself." Christina got quiet and walked away. If she couldn't speak to Ricky tonight, she could at least still check in on him and make sure he was being treated responsibly, like a person. As she turned the corner, heading toward Ricky's cell, She heard Spears's voice in the distance. It started low and then shrieked loudly, echoing down the halls. Was he shouting over the roaring thunder that vibrated through the halls? No, he was wailing. It sounded like, "Help!" Right then, Christina saw a cluster of orderlies and guards crowding around the hall, trying to break down the door to Ricky's room. "Help!" she heard Spears bark from inside. He was barricaded in, and something was clearly blocking the door. "What's going on?" Christina asked in a frenzy. "Stay back," one of the guards said, before ramming his shoulder into the door. It barely budged. Christina couldn't see inside yet, but she could hear Spears's cries between the shouts of the orderlies. "Help!" And let the cops know. "Help! We've got a situation here." An attendant sprinted off for help, and Christina took his place at the door. She peered through the lookout bars to see a tense scene inside. Ricky had removed his bed restraints and wrapped them around Spears's throat. The old man's pale pink face was turning purple. Ricky continued to pull tighter and tighter, but he wasn't enjoying himself. In fact, he looked incredibly upset. Tears streaked down his cheeks. Christina didn't know what was going on, but she wanted to reason with him, if she could. "Ricky! It's Christina!" she shouted. "Could you please let Dr. Spears go?" "No!" Ricky yelled, distraught. "This is what Buck wants." While Ricky continued to lock eyes with her, Spears managed to wriggle free. He pushed Ricky away long enough to cough air back into his lungs and pry the leather restraint guards off his neck. And then Christina saw the doctor do something no doctor should ever do. In a fit of rage, Spears kicked Ricky in the ribs, knocking the wind out of him. Then he kicked him again and again. Then he unwedged the heavy bed frame barricading the door. The orderlies rushed in. One tended to Spears, the other restrained a tearful Ricky and called for a new knockout shot. Christina was stunned. She froze as Spears walked past her, rubbing his throat. He wheezed orders. "Go to med-check and get your friend his dose." Christina returned to Sophia for a replacement syringe. On the outside, she was cool as a cucumber, but on the inside, she was fuming with anger. How dare Spears, a psychological professional, violate his oath and abuse a patient like that? She knew the doctor had a right to fight back, but the extra kicks had been too much. They were just plain cruel. She wasn't sure what she was going to do, but the little voice in her head demanded justice for Ricky, and she knew she'd get it somehow, even if that meant writing a letter to the state and risking her employment, and her future, at Penhurst. She walked with a heavy step back to Ricky's cell. There was no telling what tomorrow would bring for Ricky, but at least he'd get a good night's sleep tonight, thanks to her. Before she entered, an orderly asked, "You need backup in there to give him his shot?" "No," Christina answered. "I'll be fine." "He's all yours, but I'll be right here in the hallway." She opened the door and saw Ricky inside, under the rumpled covers. She had seen this behavior before, and was sure he was coping with the situation by using the blankets to hide his emotions, the way a kid does when he knows he's in deep trouble. Or when he's scared, she thought. She shut the door behind her. "Ricky, you okay?" she asked. No answer. She sat on the corner of the bed. She could see his wrists poking out from under the cover, restraints locked. She tried again. "Ricky, it's me, Christina. It's okay to be scared. You can talk to me." "Not scared," he finally said through the blanket. Christina thought he sounded a bit different, but maybe he was putting on a voice. "Are you hurting?" "Not anymore." "Not anymore? What did that mean?" "My time's coming up, and there ain't nothing you can do about it," Ricky's voice grumbled. "Don't say that," Christina protested, pulling back the blankets to see Ricky's pale face staring up at her, mouth open. She looked at his eyes, but there was nothing there. He wasn't blinking. His lips were turning blue. A trickle of blood dried in the corner of his mouth. Ricky was gone. "I told you," the voice groaned. "I told you it's time." But the voice wasn't coming from Ricky. Christina bolted up. She stared at Ricky's body, at his face, forever frozen in a tormented gaze. She heard his voice again. "Get me out of here, girl." But again, his mouth was not moving. He was not speaking. Yet she heard his voice as clear as day. Was she going mad? Was Ricky still speaking to her? Had Penhurst finally corrupted her mind? Was Christina going to find herself in here one day, restrained and drugged at bedtime, a pill in one hand and a vein full of knockout juice in the other? She dropped the syringe, and fluid splattered as it smashed on the floor. She turned to leave, but again heard the voice. "Get me out of here," the little voice whispered. And that was when she saw it. A little hole in the wall, in the same place Ricky would put his ear. The voice sounded like it was coming from inside the wall. Christina held her breath and bent down to look into the hole. An eye blinked at her. She shrieked, falling backward onto the floor, but remained focused on the eyes peering out at her. That familiar raspy groan said once more, "Get me out of here." The wall around the hole began to crumble, like it was being ripped up from the inside. Shaking with fear, Christina watched as the pieces dissolved, revealing the face of a man using the last of his strength to tear a patch of plaster away. He was tangled in the pipes between the walls, like a marionette caught in his own strings. "Get me out of here! Lickety-split!" Christina could tell he was badly emaciated and barely able to move. He sat perched on the pipes, like a ragged flesh-and-bone ghost, surrounded by dead insects he'd been feeding on to keep his blood pumping. His face was a pale white mess of sagging skin and scar tissue that surrounded his black eyes. He had Penhurst scrubs on, but no shoes. The horror spread across her brain like a storm. The invisible man who escaped. The man from her stories. 2 empty shoes. An invisible man. The man they'd said vanished. He hadn't escaped Penhurst after all. He had burrowed into the inner workings of the structure and gotten caught in the network of pipes that ran through the asylum's insides. He was too weak to move, but he could talk. And he was talking to Christina. The man in the wall. "Name's Buck." His voice wheezed from the wall. Buck, Christina realized. This was Ricky's Buck. The kids were wrong, Christina thought. If only monsters lived in Penhurst, that would be much easier to believe than what I'm witnessing right here. "I told that boy to go to the light, and he did," Buck said with a grin, his lips curling over his rotting teeth. "He likes being told what to do. Do you?" Christina's mind kept reeling, filling in the blanks. Buck had been talking to Ricky through the walls. That had to be it. Buck demanded things. Awful things. And Ricky did them. Ricky had no friends in here other than her. He had no parents. He had no one but Buck, a man who spoke to him and needed him. He needed Ricky to do the violent things he couldn't do to the people who had once locked him away. All Buck needed was a puppet. And all Ricky needed was a little voice to guide him. A hush fell over the store. Nancy stood up to finish her story. "Christina soon found out who the man in the wall truly was," she said, clicking the flashlight off. There, holding the moment in the dark, she finished. His name was Harland Buck, and he was believed to be the first patient to successfully escape Penhurst, though, as we all know now, that wasn't true. He'd made a home for himself there. He'd lived and died there. His story was national news. Christina read all about it from the comfort of her family home in Virginia, where she'd moved back after fainting on the job during that fateful night at Penhurst Asylum. A night she'd never forget. She is no longer nursing, but she's always listening. But is she hearing her little voice, or someone else's? Crash! The sudden noise jolted everyone in the store at once. Then there was a long silence. What was that? Robin finally said. Holy crap! Something touched me! Dustin shrieked. Henderson, calm down. Stay still, Steve called, clicking his flashlight on. A chill spread through the store, making the little hairs on the back of their necks stand up. Steve's light beam shone past the faces in the store, like a searchlight scanning the shadowy grounds of a prison yard during an escape, eventually finding Dustin, standing in front of a tape return slot, a pile of family videotapes at his feet. Steve picked up the tapes and showed them to the others. It was someone returning tapes. You're all fine, bunch of scaredy cats. I wasn't scared, Mike said. Me either, Lucas added. Erica pointed at Dustin in the dark. It was that nerd, right there. He scared himself. Sorry, guys, Dustin said, catching his breath. I've just been on edge lately. Haven't been sleeping well. He took his mini flashlight back from Nancy to make sure nothing else was hiding in the shadows around his feet. Haven't been sleeping much at all. Oh, yeah? Up late with Susie on the radio? Robin asked, teasing Dustin about his girlfriend from summer camp. No, it's not like that, Dustin said. I've been going through something intense over the last few weeks. Something that's hard to explain. Something that chills me to the bone. Ooh, do tell, Max said, intrigued. I feel a scary story coming on. Dustin shuddered just thinking about it. But maybe, just maybe, it would help to talk to someone about it, even if that someone was 7 of his closest friends. Dustin turned the flashlight beam up under his chin and gulped down his fear. What I'm about to tell you, he said, his voice becoming more and more serious, is not for the faint of heart. I may just be losing my mind, or I could actually be at the mercy of dark forces here. Which is it? It's a roll of the dice. That's why I call this